I found out my daughter wasn't mine, and that my wife had an affair with my brother for 8 years. They stole $200,000 and planned to run away. I'm writing because I still can't believe what occurred. It all began like any other month. My buddies, Howard, Jeremy, Kyle, David, John, and I, George, have known each other since we were children. We're all in our late 30s and early 40s now. We aim to meet up once a month at my beach property. It's nothing fancy, just a comfy 2-story home that's a little weathered, but it smells like the beach, which I adore. We have an old surfboard hanging on the wall in the living room. We were all into surfing back in the day. Anyway, we all have our belongings. Howard is Mr. Organized, and everything has to be just right. He will mend any picture frame that is even a millimeter off. Jeremy, he is the joker. His jokes can be a little bit harsh at times, but he's a wonderful guy at heart. He has a scar on his arm from a fight he got into years ago, but he never talks about it. Kyle is the quiet one. He's an architect who creates stunning buildings. According to my understanding, he had a difficult upbringing, yet he grew up to be okay. David is ex-military and doesn't say much about his time in duty, but you can tell he's seen a lot. He is constructed like a brick wall. John always seemed to have it all. He's a successful lawyer who always dresses nicely and drives a luxury automobile. You know the type. Our get-togethers are rather predictable. We have an old playlist of music from our college years that we always play. Howard is in control of the grill, it's his nice grill, and no one else is permitted to use it. He is quite picky about his grilling. We normally just hang around, eat, drink some beer, and catch up. Howard was particularly worked up this month. He takes out his phone and shows us a photo of his son, Alan. In the picture, Alan is scowling and appears to be very angry. Howard claims the school principal called him. Apparently, Alan was behaving up, being impolite, not listening to teachers, and his grades were sliding. Howard was beside himself. He continued screaming, "I don't even know who this kid is anymore." He was truly devastated and enraged. We all tried to give counsel, the normal kids go through phases type of thing. Then Jeremy, being Jeremy, cracked a joke. He glanced directly at Howard and said something like, "Maybe he's not yours, man." It was a bad joke, especially given Howard's displeasure. I believe we all squirmed slightly, but it was exacerbated by the fact that he shouted it straight to Howard. Kyle then asked, in his typical quiet tone, "Why don't you all just get a DNA test? Clear the air." He stated it nonchalantly, as if he were recommending we order pizza. Initially, we all laughed it off. It appeared silly, but the more we joked about it, the more we thought, well, why not? The next day, there we were, 6 mature men stepping into a paternity testing clinic. I had to explain to the receptionist why everyone needed tests. It was very embarrassing. I attempted to make light of it, but she just gave me a blank expression. To make matters worse, Howard's brother, Harold, and his 2 nephews were with us. The boys continued to ask questions. "Why are we here, Uncle George? What are they going to do?" It was embarrassing. And, of course, with all of our families present, it evolved into a hugely awkward scene. People were clearly staring. We all took the swabs, paid the cost, and agreed to meet at John's apartment the next week to receive the findings. John's place is the polar opposite of my beach house. It's everything modern, minimalist, and spotless, almost too beautiful, as if nobody lives there. We sat around, attempting to make light talk, but everyone was plainly on edge. Howard took his findings first, as he was the one who initiated everything. He'd been putting on a brave face, but we all knew he was extremely concerned about Alan. The joke Jeremy told had gone under his skin more than he cared to admit. He ripped open the packet, and I watched his expression change from one of fear to one of sheer relief. 99.99%, he exhaled, leaning back into his chair. Alan was his. He even smiled a little, raking his hands through his hair and muttering about how he was going to ground that youngster for a month for causing him such stress. The other findings were as expected, but we kept looking at John, waiting for him to say something. He was unusually quiet, and he was clearly drinking more than he normally did. He was still standing there, and when he finally said, "Jenna isn't mine?" he pushed the paper across the table, his hand shaking so violently that he nearly knocked over his beverage. What made things worse was how John just stood there, staring at nothing, as if he was trying to make sense of figures that couldn't be real. He kept whispering, 25.0%, like a broken record. In some ways, everything went downhill from there. Howard, in shock, knocked over a glass, which smashed on the floor. Jeremy, who had made the initial joke, appeared to want the earth to swallow him whole. Kyle simply closed his eyes, as if he were trying to block everything out. David looked like he was about to punch something. And me? I felt a surge of sickness, relief that my children were mine, and anguish for John. It was simply dreadful. The whole affair seemed strange. We sat for hours. The aftermath was a mess. John's wife, Alicia, went on the offense first. She stormed into John's office. I wasn't there, but I heard about it via John. She was yelling at him, calling him a liar, and making a big deal in front of his coworkers. It was very embarrassing for him. Then she attempted to persuade my wife, Maria, to her side. She came over to our house crying, attempting to create a story about John misinterpreting everything and how it was all a big mistake. However, Maria is quite sharp. She saw through Alicia's ruse quite immediately. Alicia often changed her story, contradicting herself. Maria later told me that she had gotten a horrible sense from her. Alicia's next tactic was to phone Kyle late at night. She was sobbing and virtually asking him to help her, claiming John was ruining her life. Kyle, being the nice soul he is, listened to her for a time, but made no promises. He informed me about it the next day, and we were all beginning to see how manipulative Alicia was. The reality emerged gradually at first. Alicia stated that her romance with John's brother, Stephen, was a one-time occurrence, a moment of weakness. John naturally did not believe her. He performed some research, possibly even engaged a private investigator. He wouldn't tell for certain. He discovered that the relationship was far longer and more involved than Alicia had previously admitted. The ultimate encounter occurred at their home. I was not present, but John informed us about it afterward. Alicia eventually admitted everything. The romance began before their wedding and had continued on and off for years. She also stated that Stephen had major financial issues, and she had been covertly providing him money, John's money. And things got worse. It was more than simply a casual flirtation. They had been meeting in hotels while John worked late, believing he was providing for his family. They even used John's automobile occasionally. They celebrated Jenna's birthday like a couple, snapping photos and pretending to be joyful. Days before John's family gathering, Stephen had been sending Jenna costly gifts that John could never afford, all purchased with money that had been essentially stolen from him. It appeared that he was attempting to buy Jenna's adoration. Is this the lowest blow of all? She would tell John she was working late when, in fact, she was out with Stephen. The financial side of things was completely out of control. These family loans that Alicia had been handing Stephen were massive. He'd squandered his money on gambling, lousy investments, and frivolous purchases like a nice watch and sports vehicle. He stated that these were business costs. Alicia had even forged John's signature on a few loan paperwork. They made bogus invoices and receipts to hide their tracks. John discovered emails between them in which they discussed leaving their husbands and running away together. Everything was laid out in black and white. When everything started spilling out, Alicia began hurriedly phoning everyone, attempting to mitigate the damage. She called me, my wife, and even contacted my parents. It was pathetic. The entire event culminated during Jenna's birthday celebration. It was a spectacular event at a nice restaurant. Everyone was pretending to be joyful. Stephen was present, acting smug and touchy-feely with Alicia. It made John obviously angry. He kept clenching and unclenching his hands while standing near the exit, as if waiting for Stephen to flee. Then, during the toasts, Stephen mustered the courage to stand up and thank John for being such a wonderful brother and provider. He understood it was all a deception. He handed Jenna a very expensive gift, most likely purchased using John's money. He also began bragging to some of the other guests about his own financial triumphs, making John look awful by contrast. That was the breaking moment. John stepped up, took the DNA test results from his pocket, and displayed them for everybody to see. He stated unequivocally, 25.0% probability. He then proceeded to deliver this brief, furious speech, detailing everything, Alicia and Stephen's affair, the falsehoods, and the stolen money. He even showed everyone printed out images of their emails and photos from when they were planning their future together. He made certain that everyone knew about the watch, the car, the extravagant parties, and the fictitious business trip to a tropical island. John's mother-in-law gasped and fainted. His father-in-law attempted to punch John, but fortunately, some other guests pulled him back. Stephen attempted to sneak out the back, but John's father, who, like David, is an ex-military, saw him and knocked him down. It was not pretty. Some individuals attempted to assist, while others simply stood there, mouths agape, watching the entire incident happen. The police were summoned, but they did not take any action. They said it was a domestic disagreement. I later learned that someone had recorded the entire thing on their phone and posted it online. It was not any of us. The consequences were quick and terrible. John's dad was outraged. He refused to speak with Stephen and proceeded to Stephen's flat, where his wife also lived. He grabbed all of Stephen's stuff and put them outside the apartment owned by Stephen and John's father. He subsequently wrote a note to the entire family, stating that he no longer regarded Stephen as son. He did, however, talk with John. He informed him he was disappointed with how things turned out, but he still loved him. Stephen's wife, Kelly, had a different narrative. She did more than just yell, she took action. She promptly filed for divorce and locked all of their joint accounts, barring Stephen from receiving any additional funds. She retained a lawyer and did not stop there. She went to John's house, confronted Alicia, yelled at her, and even smacked her in the face while pulling large chunks of her hair off. I do not condone violence, but I cannot say I blamed her. Kelly eventually began treatment to try to overcome the trauma. John, on the other hand, withdrew. He went to one of his beach houses, not mine, but it wasn't as comfortable for him as it had been previously. It seemed like a prison. He would not answer the phone. He would not see anyone. He ordered meals online and stared at the ocean for hours. He later informed me that he had dreams about the DNA test and the overall affair. He really considered selling the property and committing suicide somewhere in a distant wilderness, but he couldn't bring himself to do so, too many memories. He began drinking extensively to numb the ache. He stopped shaving and changing his clothes. He simply gave up. Meanwhile, Alicia and Stephen were residing at John's house. Apparently, Stephen moved in after getting booted out of his residence. They acted as if nothing had happened. They were seen going on shopping sprees, purchasing pricey clothing and accessories. They were even plotting their escape, working out how to get away from the disaster they had created. It was horrible. They ordered pricey takeout every night while John struggled to pay his debts. They had noisy parties, which bothered the neighbors. Alicia even began remodeling Jenna's room despite knowing she might have to leave at any time. And Stephen, the jackass, began parking his automobiles in John's driveway. John started experiencing panic attacks. Just seeing Alicia and Stephen together triggered them. He stopped caring for himself. He wasn't showering or eating properly. One day, he accidentally smashed a framed photo of Jenna. He wounded his palm badly on the broken glass, but he didn't appear to notice. That's when we, his pals, realized we needed to act. We held a meeting at my residence. Howard brought all of the bank statements and, with John's assistance, the fake documents. He didn't simply show us the documents, he hurled them on the table, scattering them around. He was furious. Jeremy claimed he wanted to bash Stephen up. David, given his military background, even joked about making them disappear. I believe he was joking anyway. Kyle, who is usually so cool and controlled, was visibly angry. We spent hours discussing, fighting, and attempting to figure out what to do. We argued the legality and morality of it all. Howard completed some research, including landlord-tenant legislation and eviction procedures. He came up with an idea. Jeremy would be the muscle, so to speak. David devised a backup plan in case something went wrong. We even developed a code word, pineapple, to indicate that the job had been completed. I was just sitting there, Pikachu-faced, listening to everything. The next step was to get John out of the way and avoid unintentionally turning up until we finished what we were going to do. We didn't simply invite him over for a cookout since it would have been too suspicious. Kyle feigned to seek John's legal counsel on a serious property matter. Given John's occupation, it was a valid reason. We kept John engaged with food and alcohol while also keeping the conversation going, distracting him from what was truly going on. Meanwhile, the rest of us visited John's residence. The confrontation was fierce. Alicia instantly began playing the victim, crying and claiming we had no right to be there. Stephen attempted to seem strong, but you could see fear in his eyes. We took pictures and films of everything, documenting the chaos and the fancy stuff they purchased with John's money. We discovered additional evidence, including images of them on secret travels and documentation indicating that they intended to buy a property together. We didn't just neatly pack their possessions when we were clearing them out. We hurled them out the window, resulting in a massive pile of garments, shoes, and whatever else we could find. Jeremy was raving at Stephen, calling him every term in the book and threatening him if he ever approached John or Jenna again. I discovered a stockpile of valuable items that Alicia had been hiding. I flung it at her feet, saying, "Here's your blood money." Alicia began weeping hysterically, yelling, and threatening to call the police. Jeremy stepped in and gently explained her that the house was exclusively in John's name, that they had signed a prenuptial agreement before getting married, and that she had no legal right to be there. Howard finally got in Stephen's face, forcing him up against the garage door and calling him a lowlife. Kyle and John waited at my beach house. I sent him the word pineapple. Finally, He informed John that it was time to return him to his true home. Kyle described John as a jumble of emotions, including rage, relief, anxiety, and remorse. He was driving wildly, speeding, slowing, and then speeding up again. He continued to murmur to himself, revisiting the last 8 years of his life in his thoughts, attempting to make sense of it all. He was scared of what this could do to Jenna. When they arrived at the house, it was quite the sight. Alicia and Stephen's belongings, including clothing, furniture, and golf equipment, were strewn around the front lawn. The neighbors were outside, watching the entire event. It felt like a yard sale from hell. Alicia stood there, red-faced and enraged, yelling at John. She was blaming him for everything, claiming he was wrecking her life and was a horrible guy. Stephen stood behind her, gazing down at the ground, as if humiliated. He didn't say anything. John did not even recognize them. He strolled right by them, as if they were invisible. He went into the home. It was disturbingly silent. Of course, the furniture remained, but everything else, all the small personal touches that made it their home, had vanished. It was like coming into a set model home, not the one he'd shared with his family for years. He moved from room to room, slowly taking everything in. The emptiness was the worst part. He told me later that was when it hit him. They were genuinely gone. While the turmoil erupted at John's house that day, Jenna was safe at her best friend's house for a playdate. Her friend's mother was one of the few parents at Jenna's school who saw through Alicia's act and was always sympathetic to John. She had planned this playdate knowing what was going to happen at the house, because we had told her about it. She returned perplexed. John needed to explain everything. "Is Uncle Stephen my true father?" she asked. John felt nauseous. Then she asked, "Don't you love me anymore?" He broke down, telling her that nothing could ever change his feelings for her. But then Alicia returned, seized Jenna by force, and we couldn't stop her. John spent the first night alone. The next day, he told us he had ended up sitting on Jenna's bed, marveling at her toys and drawings. It was one of the most challenging things he'd ever done. He spent the following few weeks in his daughter's room, and it was a blur. John wasn't doing well. He had both good and bad days. I believe that seeing a therapist helped him. He attempted to keep himself busy by focusing on his work. He began playing his guitar again, which he hadn't done in years. He even went surfing a few times, hoping to relive part of his former life. We, his pals, supported him every step of the way. We frequently checked on him, made sure he was eating, and hauled him out of the home when necessary. The biggest worry that troubled John, the one he couldn't shake, was, what does Jenna think of me now? He was consumed by the dread that she blamed him, that she believed he had abandoned her. He kept wondering, does she believe I abandoned her? Will she ever forgive me for what occurred? He couldn't ask her directly just yet. He had missed her school dance presentation, which she had been practicing for months. He felt bad about it, but he didn't know how to confront her or explain why he hadn't been there. The guilt was crushing. He simply wanted to cuddle his little baby and tell her everything was fine, but he wasn't sure whether it was. He wasn't sure if he'd be okay. However, John could not have fought this fight alone. None of us could have handled something like this on our own, and it wasn't only the guys who rallied around John. Our spouses were also great. They observed how much John was hurting and stepped up big time. They didn't just say they were sorry, they did something. They confronted Alicia immediately. They made it clear to her that they understood exactly what she had done and would not allow her get away with it. They posed a formidable challenge. They also cared for John. They put together a care box for him, complete with his favorite snacks, novels, and a handwritten note from each of them expressing their support. They took turns fixing him dinner, ensuring that he ate something other than takeaway. They made sure he wasn't alone by inviting him to family gatherings and movie nights, anything to lift his spirits. They treated him like family because that is who he was. I don't think John expected this kind of support, and it made a significant difference. It demonstrated that he was not alone in this fight. We, his pals, had also been quietly preparing. We had been combining our money since we knew John would need an excellent counsel. We had done our research and located someone who specialized in high-conflict divorce and custody situations. This lawyer was known for winning and obtaining outcomes. We presented John with a retainer fee, explaining that we were all in this together. John hesitated at first. He was frightened of making matters worse for Jenna. He was frightened of losing her entirely. He kept saying, "What if I fight this and lose? What if she ends up hating me even more?" We understood his concerns, but we refused to give up. We reminded him that being a father was about love, being present for your child, and providing a secure and nurturing environment. We told him that he needed to choose to be Jenna's father every day, no matter what. We persuaded him that he deserved to be in her life, and she deserved to be with him. Eventually, John consented. He was still afraid, but also determined. He was prepared to fight for Jenna. He wanted the judge to understand the truth about Alicia and Stephen, including their falsehoods, manipulation, and greed. He wished to protect Jenna from them. The divorce procedure was a nightmare for John. The lawyer we hired predicted it would take 6 to 8 months, but it ended up taking about 18 months. Alicia battled him every step of the way. She opposed everything, including the asset distribution and custody arrangements, and even attempted to claim that the house was partially hers. It was not. John acquired it from his grandma before they got married. She dragged out every single meeting, misscheduled appointments, and repeatedly requested paperwork extensions. Every time we thought it was nearly done, Alicia threw another wrench in the works. She sought to imply John was an unfit parent because he worked too much. Rich, coming from someone who has been sneaking around with his sibling. She even attempted to use his drinking against him, despite the fact that he had only recently begun drinking frequently after learning of her betrayal. But when John's lawyer showed all of the fake documents to the court, things became serious quickly. Alicia falsified John's signature on at least 10 distinct loan documents totaling more than $200,000. The judge saw this as more than just a divorce issue. It was outright fraud. They discovered evidence that she had been moving money to Stephen for years, using fictitious business invoices to conceal their activities. The district attorney became involved after John's lawyer provided the material. Alicia eventually faced criminal accusations for fraud and forgery. She attempted to imply that Stephen had pressed her into it. She ultimately agreed to a plea deal that included 3 years of probation, obligatory financial counseling, and repayment of every dime she had stolen. The judge also limited her visitation rights with Jenna to every other weekend, during daylight hours. There were no overnight stays or trips out of state for Jenna, and all visits were overseen by a court-appointed guardian. It was harsh, yet considering what she'd done, she got off easy. Stephen had less luck with the court system than Alicia. When the proof of financial fraud was revealed, he was charged with faking documents and stealing John's money, just like she was. But the judge didn't buy his excuses. Stephen was sentenced to 2 years in jail, while Alicia received probation. He, like Alicia, had to repay all they'd stolen, but being in jail prevented him from doing so immediately away. Stephen and Alicia's relationship came apart dramatically when they no longer had John's money to play with and were instead arrested. Alicia began blaming Stephen for everything, claiming he had deceived her. Stephen couldn't take being broke. They had a massive fight in court, yelling about how they had ruined each other's lives. After 16 months of misery, John finally got divorced. We went out to celebrate on the day it was finalized. John did not say anything that night. He just sat there, looking fatigued and relieved. It was over. He might now begin rebuilding his life. Jenna, that's the bit that tears my heart the most, was struggling with things for a while. Who would not? A therapist helped her comprehend that Stephen was her biological father, but John was still her father. John told me about a conversation they had where Jenna questioned if she could still call him dad. He claimed he cried for an hour after that. She didn't want much to do with Stephen, which astonished everyone but John. She rapidly realized that Stephen had contributed to the harm of her father, the only real father she had ever known. Stephen tried to give her expensive gifts during supervised visits, but she refused them. Smart youngster. She told the court-appointed supervisor that she did not want to spend any time with Stephen at all. Life gradually returned to a new normal. We had one more picnic at my beach property, which served as a sort of celebration. John thanked us for all we had done. He made a self-deprecating joke, indicating that he was finally recuperating. He was playing with the youngsters, throwing them in the air and making them giggle. It was evident how much he enjoyed being a father. He looked at us and said, "You guys are my family." And he meant it. We were more than just friends. We were brothers, pulled together by this strange, incredible event. If there is a moral to the story, it is that good friends will be there for you no matter what happens. Even if your life collapses, they will be there to assist you pick up the pieces. Cast out by my family for favoring my golden child, sister, my aunt helped me. Now they seek my help. Am I the asshole for refusing? My life was completely upended 10 years ago when my family, particularly my sister Claire, chose to exclude me from the house. Why? I was viewed as a traitor by them since I managed to pay for my college education without their assistance. I had nowhere to go when I was 18 and ready to start college. All of this was made possible by Claire, the golden child, who consistently made me seem unimportant in contrast. Claire was my favorite from a young age, yet she is 4 years older than I am. She was the object of my parents' obsession. They would practically hold a celebration if she received an A. You understand what I mean when I say, "Oh, cool. What's for dinner?" When I receive an A. My parents treated Claire like a prodigy by the time she left for a prestigious business school. They covered everything, including her expensive clothes, condo, and tuition. I kept my head down in the meanwhile, knowing that I would have to work things out on my own. Upon being admitted to a prominent UK college to study history, I had the hope that I may receive some assistance. However, no. I was told directly by my parents that they were unable to pay for my education. Although I recognized the high cost of college, their refusal to even co-sign a loan really infuriated me. I only asked them to help me escape a lifetime of debt, not to cover everything. However, they declined. Their logic? They were also hoping to launch a small business at the time, so it seems that all of their resources were going toward that. We already paid for Claire's college. We have to think about our future now. I was stuck. When it came to me, my parents were all about being frugal and responsible. I didn't want to miss the opportunity to attend this college, but it felt like they were purposefully creating barriers for me. My parents had no difficulty spending a lot of money on Claire. I had no choice but to ask my Aunt Denise. My dad's older sister, Denise, is the total antithesis of my parents. In addition to being a brilliant neurosurgeon, she is also quite grounded. There was always this strange tension between her and my parents. They would pretend to be kind at family get-togethers, but it was obvious they were angry with her success. Especially my dad detested being overshadowed by her. At first, I didn't want to engage Denise, but I had to. I contacted her to see if she might cover my tuition. She made no hesitation at all. "Of course, I'll help. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I was afraid my father would learn. He would go crazy if he found out that I had asked Denise for money behind his back. I therefore pleaded with Denise to keep it a secret. I believed I was safe for a while. I had paid my tuition and was preparing to go to school. Claire then made the decision to sabotage everything. I'm still not sure how she learned that I had asked Aunt Denise for assistance, but she did. And because she was Claire, she had to make it into a tremendous, dramatic ordeal rather than simply letting it go. I felt something wasn't right the moment I got home from a night out with some pals. Everything I owned was put in boxes. My books, my clothes, even my bed linens. Claire was standing there with this smug, self-satisfied expression on her face as my parents were seated in the living room. I had the impression that I had entered a perverse intervention. My father wasted no time. I had no idea what he was talking about, so I looked at the stack of papers he threw at me and said, "Explain this." I became aware that Claire had completely lost her mind at that point. She had created fictitious emails between Aunt Denise and me, giving the impression that I was betraying the family by disclosing information about their business plans in return for Denise covering my tuition. My eyes were unbelievable. In order to make it appear as though I had betrayed my family, Claire had combed through my laptop, discovered actual emails between Denise and me, and altered them using Photoshop or another program. I was taken aback. My parents refused to listen to me when I tried to explain that it was all a lie. No matter what I replied, they continued to say, "We trusted you, and you stabbed us in the back." They obviously believed Claire. She was always believed by them. It seemed as though I had vanished from the world. They instructed me to immediately collect my belongings and depart. I told a total lie, which led to my official expulsion from the house. I pleaded with them to think again. Aunt Denise had already promised to cover my tuition, so I didn't want to put her through any more trouble. My parents, however, were unconcerned. They claimed they didn't want to interact with me and labeled me a traitor. That was it. I only had a few boxes of my belongings and the clothing on my back when I fled. Aunt Denise took me in. To be honest, I'm not sure how I would have managed without her. She immediately took me in and showed me the kind of family I hadn't experienced in years. Denise was the only person who truly cared about me while my parents were preoccupied with their future business and worshipping Claire. I will always be thankful for that. But even today, I can't get rid of the memories of that night. Claire standing there with that arrogant expression on her face, knowing she had won, my parents staring at me like I was a criminal, and all of my belongings packed away when I walked into my house. I was standing on Aunt Denise's doorstep, my life in boxes, having been evicted from my own home. I was still trying to figure out what the hell had occurred. It like a nightmare. In a single night, how does one go from feeling like a member of a family to experiencing homelessness? Even though the entire situation seemed bizarre, I couldn't claim to be all that shocked. Although my parents had always made it apparent that Claire came first, I never imagined it would go this far. Being the angel that she is, Denise embraced me wholeheartedly. She didn't pry or ask a lot of questions. She simply told me that her house was mine for however long I needed it after realizing how hurt I was. That type of generosity, man, it really got to me because I knew at that moment that I had never experienced anything like that from my own parents. I thus took up residence with Aunt Denise. Initially, waking up in her guest room and seeing a house that wasn't mine felt weird. But as time went on, it began to feel more like home than the location where I was raised. As we talked about everything, we got closer. As it happens, I had no idea how much Aunt Denise knew about my parents' actions. For years, she had avoided them and only attended family gatherings out of duty. She revealed to me something that completely shocked me. My father had harbored animosity toward her long before I was even born. It had always been Denise's turn. She attended medical school, married a wonderful man who tragically died young, and created a wonderful life. My dad was doing all right in the meantime, but he constantly felt like she was taking center stage. He was strangely competitive whenever they met. According to Denise, their relationship had basically devolved into a contest to see who could appear more attractive to the other members of the family. However, my dad hated his sister rather than being proud of her. And it wasn't just about jobs, he felt dominated in practically every aspect of life, including money and society. Denise suspected that my parents' treatment of me had been influenced by their jealousy. Denise knew all of this years ago, but she chose to remain silent so as not to aggravate me. She told me everything now that I lived with her. She seemed to be filling in all the blanks in my life that had never made sense, like why my parents always went out of their way for Claire and why they never seemed to care what I did. It all came down to a strange family dynamic that I was completely unaware of. Although it was wonderful living with Denise, I was unable to fully unwind. I kept expecting my parents to call, for Claire to suddenly appear, or for them to say they were sorry. Naturally, though, that never took place. Weeks passed, and nothing happened. Not a single phone call, no text. I was initially incensed. How could they just ignore me as if I didn't exist? But eventually the rage subsided and I became numb. My brain seemed to be turning off all of my feelings so that I could continue to function. But Denise was fantastic. Unless I wanted to, Mom never forced me to discuss what had happened. She gave me time to think things through. She even made sure I had all I needed before I departed for the UK by helping me organize everything for school. I honestly don't know how I would have survived that period of time if it weren't for her. However, despite her backing, my parents' silence was terrible. You would think they would at least check in on your child after evicting them. However, no. A part of me still had expectations, even though I suppose I shouldn't have. Claire texted me about a month after the entire incident. It was just as annoying as she was, which is why I can still clearly recall it. The only thing it said was, "Hope you're doing okay. By the way, don't leave your laptop lying around." That was it. She reminded me that she was the reason I was expelled, but she made no attempt to apologize or acknowledge what she had done. As I gazed at the television, my blood began to boil. Simply put, she was making fun of me. I didn't answer. What was the purpose? There was nothing that made Claire feel bad. She thought that she had won some strange family game. I considered responding with a sarcastic text, but I realized it wouldn't change anything. She would simply relish the attention. After blocking her number, I made an effort to move on. It wasn't simple. A part of me was still hoping for a message from my parents every time I checked my phone. It could have been a passive-aggressive email from my dad acting as though nothing had occurred, or it could have been a message from my mom apologizing for everything. However, there was radio silence. Denise and I developed a strong routine in the months that followed. She evolved into more than simply my aunt. She became my companion, confidant, and essentially my sole remaining relative. I began to see how dysfunctional my parents truly were. They had devoted so much of their time to making Claire into the ideal daughter that they had neglected everything else. And it would be too late for them to correct it when Claire made a mistake, which she would eventually do. As I was preparing to leave for school, I received a second message, this one from my father. The message was brief and straightforward. Good luck in the UK. That was it. No explanation, no apology, nothing. It was like being slapped across the face. All he had to say after everything was, good luck. I didn't even know how to react, so I didn't. I tried not to worry about it and simply erased the message. Denise took me to the airport the day I departed for the UK. She gave me a firm hug and expressed her pride in me, saying she knew I would succeed. Those words, spoken to me by a member of my family for the first time in my life, struck me more strongly than I had anticipated. I felt as though I was leaving behind more than just my house when I boarded that plane. I was leaving behind the aspect of myself that had always aimed for my parents' favor. I made the decision that I no longer needed them after that. I had myself, I had Denise, and I had my future. I wasn't going to waste any more energy chasing after people who obviously didn't care about me, but if they wanted to get in touch, that's okay. I was finished. The UK was a terrific place to live. I made some friends, adapted to college life, and stopped worrying about my family all the time for the first time in years. Although I can't claim to have forgotten about them, I can say that I wasn't thinking about them as much. I was concentrating on my education, planning for the future, and simply attempting to live a life free from the stress of being my parents' shadow. Naturally, though, something had to happen and ruin everything just as everything was going well. I came back to my hometown after graduation, got a fantastic, well-paying job, and then my mother called. Yes, my mother. The same woman who had stopped talking to me ever since I was expelled. It came as a complete surprise. My phone buzzed while I was reviewing some notes for a paper in my dorm room. For a while, I thought I was seeing things when I saw her name appear. My thoughts were racing as I gazed at the television. Do I have to respond to it? Disregard it? Why was she calling me now, after all that had transpired? I gave it a few more rings. Then I took up, against my better judgment. Hello, I answered, attempting to sound composed despite my racing heart. She was unsure of what to say, as seen by the delay on the other end. At last she spoke something. Hey. It's your mom. Who else would it be, really? However, I didn't say that. After nearly 2 years of silence, I simply waited for her to explain why she was calling. After hesitating once again, she abruptly stated, "We need to talk." I couldn't resist laughing. She wanted to talk now? After all? It was really normal for her. However, despite my annoyance, I had a natural curiosity. Why was she contacting me after all this time, and what could possibly be so important? How about, I asked in the most neutral tone I could. She stammered as though she was trying to find the perfect way to say it. Your father and I, we want to see you? I could clearly see the direction of this. They didn't want to see me because they felt awful for throwing me out or because they missed me. They were in need of something and I was very certain of what it was. Why? I asked directly. Her delayed response just strengthened my suspicions. Her voice was quieter when she did talk, as if she was attempting to appear worried and maternal. I've been going through a difficult period with your dad. The pandemic has made things difficult. The true cause for the call was there. It was precisely what I had anticipated, financial difficulties. I knew their business wasn't doing well, but I hadn't heard much about it since I left. Denise had stated in passing that their shop wasn't doing as well as they had hoped, and it made sense that they were having trouble given the pandemic. But after everything they had done to me, I wasn't going to step in and save them. All right. And, I spoke in a flat tone, I had no intention of making things simple for her. She began, "Your sister, Claire, has been taking care of things for us, but..." I interrupted her at that point. Knowing where this was going, I said, "Let me guess. Claire messed everything up." Her response was sufficient, but there was a lengthy gap on her end. Claire had messed it up, of course. I had no idea why they were taken aback. She always cared more about how she looked than about putting in the effort. It was backfiring. They had trusted her with everything. My mother drew a breathless gasp. She said, "Things haven't been going as planned. And we require assistance." I chuckled. I was unable to resist. They wanted my assistance after everything, after kicking me out, interrupting me, and allowing Claire to run me over? It was unbelievable how bold it all was. Unbelievable, I whispered to myself. "What's so amusing?" my mother inquired, as though she was truly perplexed and couldn't comprehend why I wasn't seizing the opportunity to intervene and save the day. "Are you serious? Do you genuinely believe that I will assist you?" I said, raising my voice. All the feelings I had been suppressing for the last 2 years were rising to the surface, and I could feel the rage rising. Her voice faltered as she said, "We are your parents. We were not perfect, but... However, we require you." Even though she couldn't see me, I shook my head. "Mom, you weren't simply making mistakes. I was ejected from the house by you. You trusted Claire's falsehoods about your own child. You need me now that we haven't spoken in years? And all of a sudden, I'm expected to abandon everything and run?" After then, she was silent. She was clearly unsure of what to say. She most likely wasn't used to me advocating for myself in this way. I would have just followed their instructions when I was still living at home in the hopes that it would maintain harmony. However, it is no longer the case. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me again because I had changed. She spoke at last, but her voice was different. She no longer made an effort to sound kind. She now sounded annoyed, as if she was surprised that I was being so challenging. Sharply, she remarked, "We're still your family. That is at least how much you owe us." The last straw was that. I responded icily, "I owe you absolutely nothing. Go ask Claire for aid if you need it. Remember that she's your golden child?" I hung up the phone without waiting for her answer. Even though my hands were shaking and my heart was racing, I experienced an odd sensation of relief. At last, I had expressed what I needed to. I wasn't going to help them sort out their mess. They could do it alone. I informed Aunt Denise about the situation over the phone that evening. She wasn't shocked in the least. She remarked, "They have been depending on Claire for years. It was only a question of time until everything caught up with them." After a lengthy conversation, I was even more convinced that I had made the proper choice. My parents were now suffering because they had favored Claire above me. Even though that seemed harsh, I wasn't responsible for correcting their errors. I felt free for the first time in a long time. I didn't require their acceptance or approval. I wasn't going to allow them to drag me back into their toxic mess now that I had my own life. I had survived their betrayal, therefore I had done my part. It was their time to face the repercussions now. First update. After that phone conversation with my mother, I believed that the family drama was over. To be honest, I was pleased with the way things turned out. At last, I had defended myself and stated unequivocally that I would not serve as their safety net. I assumed they would simply give up and resume relying on Claire. However, I didn't account for my sister's capacity to stir things up. Claire wasn't going to let me get away with it, of course. Something strange happened around 2 weeks after my mom and I spoke on the phone. A knock on the door interrupted my otherwise uneventful Saturday afternoon while I was tidying up around my house. I don't get many visits anymore. I was a little perplexed because I live alone and the most of my friends know to text before they visit. When I peered through the peephole, guess who was there? Yes, Claire. I briefly believed that I might be seeing things. Why had she come here? With the exception of that one dumb text concerning my laptop, she hadn't spoken to me in years, so why was she now showing up at my door as if nothing had happened? Although my first instinct was to ignore her, I knew Claire well enough to know that she would stay until she achieved her goals. Before I could say anything, she grinned as if we were best friends as I opened the door. "Hey," she exclaimed, sounding vivacious and phony. "A long time has passed." I was totally unprepared and just stared at her for a moment. "Yes, it has. Claire, what are you doing here?" She had this incredibly charming look on her face as if she believed she could win me back with charm. She tilted her head slightly and continued, "I wanted to talk. May I enter?" I remained in the doorway with my arms crossed. "How about?" I asked, trying to sound as impartial as I could. For a moment, her smile wavered, but she immediately got it back. She tried to seem nonchalant as she said, "Come on. Maybe we should just speak inside?" It's crucial. I ought to have declined. I ought to have told her to go at that very moment. However, my curiosity overcame me. I didn't bother making her feel welcome, but I moved aside to let her in. I didn't ask if she wanted something to drink, and I didn't offer her a seat. After everything she had done, she was fortunate that I was still allowing her to enter my space. As she entered, she seemed to be taking in the space. She seemed to be trying to strike up a conversation when she said, "Nice apartment." I didn't answer. I wasn't here to make friends. "All right, Claire," I responded, cutting right to the chase. "What are you looking for?" She let out a loud sigh as if she was already worn out from the game she was playing. She folded her arms and replied, "Mom told me about your conversation. You know, she's pretty upset." I arched an eyebrow. "Angry?" "Claire, she threw me out of the house. What is it that she must be upset about?" As if I were the one acting irrationally, Claire rolled her eyes. "Look, I'm not here to go over anything again. Both of us are aware that you have always been challenging." The casualness with which she said that nearly made me chuckle. "Hard," I said it again. "Are you for real now? To get me expelled from the residence, you made up emails. Is that challenging?" She dismissively waved her hand. "That's from long ago. I came here in order to put things right." Uncertain if I had heard her correctly, I blinked. "Would you like to put things right?" I asked, my words brimming with doubt. She nodded as if this were the most logical thing ever. "Yeah," she answered. "I think it's time to move past the family issues, even though I realize they got complicated and I may have overreacted at the time." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "Do you believe that you overreacted?" I spoke, straining to maintain a steady tone. "You ruined my relationship with our parents, Claire. You misled them and said lies about me, And now you're just standing here acting as if it doesn't even matter. I noticed that she was growing irritated as her smile dimmed a bit. Remember, I didn't come here to dispute. I came to ask for your assistance. Finally, I realized why she was actually at my apartment. Claire wasn't here to apologize or make amends, of course. I had to give her something. My jaw tightened as I gazed at her, anticipating her next move. Finally letting go of the artificial sweetness, she stated, I've been trying to keep the business going. However, it has been somewhat difficult. We were severely affected by the pandemic, and even though I'm doing everything I can, it's not enough. We are in danger of losing everything, even though Mom and Dad don't want to acknowledge it. With no pity in my heart, I crossed my arms. I'm going to assume that you want me to help you out. Claire made an uncomfortable move. With defensiveness, she stated, I'm not asking for a handout. I simply believe that we might be able to work something out together. I take it you're doing well for yourself? I assumed you would like to assist the family. She was unbelievable to me. She was attempting to use remorse to persuade me to save the family business, which she had destroyed. You figured incorrectly, I replied bluntly. Claire blinked, obviously unprepared for that reaction. What do you mean? Wait, I said firmly. I mean, I'm not helping you. Not after all of what you have done. Claire, you destroyed my life. Now that you're in difficulty, you expect me to forget that I turned my own parents against me and come to your aid? She looked at me in disbelief. Claire was at a loss for words for the first time in her life. But, we're family. She murmured haltingly, her confidence fading a bit. I gave a headshake. We stopped being family the day you made it your mission to destroy me. Claire's expression turned pale. I could tell she was having trouble processing the fact that she wasn't used to hearing no. She stood up after a long awkward quiet. Fine, she answered icily. If that's how you want it. Saying, that's how it's going to be. I refused to listen. You made your choices, Claire. Now you have to deal with the consequences. She slammed the door behind her and ran out of the apartment without saying another word. I let the strain out of me for a minute as I stood there. I felt guilty, as if I had been too severe. However, that remorse quickly vanished as I realized everything she had done to me. I felt like I was in charge of my life for the first time in years. Claire's shadow no longer surrounded me. I wasn't the scapegoat or the second best option. At last, I was free of it all. Second update. After Claire stormed out of my apartment, I assumed that everything would die down and that she would finally realize that I was done with her and the whole family drama. Naturally, though, I didn't realize how obstinate she might be. The subsequent wave didn't even arrive a week later. Claire wasn't the one who knocked on my door this time. Both of my parents were involved. Funny how these things usually seem to happen on my days off, and it was a Saturday once more. The knock came as I was browsing through my phone while seated on the couch. And it wasn't soft. The knock was one of those loud, persistent ones that indicates the person on the other end isn't going anywhere anytime soon. I stood up, immediately suspecting who it might be. My mother and father were standing together like a united front when I opened the door. My dad appeared uneasy, as if he didn't want to be there. However, my mother? She was determined to clean up whatever mess had been caused, even if it took using force to get through it, according to the expression in her eye. I leaned against the doorframe and sighed. What do you want? I suppose my mother was trying to maintain a nice demeanor when she smiled at me. Can we come in and talk? We need to sort some things out. I wanted to slam the door in their faces, but I reasoned that they would simply keep coming if I didn't let them in immediately. So I sighed loudly and moved aside to let them in. As they entered, they looked about as if they were expecting something more than a simple apartment. My mom immediately headed for the couch, sitting down and stroking the seat next to her as if I were a small child she was attempting to comfort, while my dad remained silent. I crossed my arms and replied bluntly, I'll stand. All right, she responded, her smile taut. Look, we know things have been difficult between us. I said again, raising an eyebrow. Difficult? That's what you're calling it? When my dad did speak, it was in a rough, low voice. We didn't come here to argue. Without even trying to disguise my annoyance, I questioned. Then what did you come here for? Because I'm pretty sure we've already been over everything. Claire tried, you tried, and I made myself clear, I'm not helping. My mother's smile faltered a bit. She most likely wasn't used to me responding in this manner. She leaned forward a little and continued, that's not why we're here. We're here because we want to apologize. It nearly made me chuckle. Apologize? For what, exactly? Kicking me out? Believing Claire's lies? Or was it that you didn't even bother checking in on me for 2 years? My dad shifted uneasily, as if he would rather be somewhere else than here, and my mom's face hardened. They obviously didn't anticipate me shoving it back in their faces in that manner. My mother added, "We know we made mistakes," in a softer tone. "But we're family, and family has to stick together." I could sense that I was getting impatient. It was just the same thing again. They would whip out the family card as if it were meant to wipe out all the bad things that had transpired. This time, though, I wasn't going to fall for it. I stated rather plainly, "You guys are only here because you need something from me. If things hadn't gone south with the business, I wouldn't even be hearing from you. Let's not pretend this is about family." There was silence for a while. When my dad did finally speak, it was in a rougher but more honest voice than I had heard him in years. "You're right." I was surprised by that. I stared at him and blinked. "What?" "You're right," he said again, letting out a deep sigh. "We screwed up. We believed Claire. We pushed you out, and we didn't even think twice about it. And now, well, now things are falling apart, and we're desperate." I was at a loss for words. I didn't think he would be clean about it. In contrast, my mother appeared to be attempting to maintain her composure. She obviously hadn't anticipated that he would simply put everything out that way. I added, "I appreciate the honesty," following a lengthy silence. "But that doesn't change anything." Then, with a sharper voice, my mother interrupted. "It doesn't change the fact that we need you, and you owe us, after everything we've done for you." Once more, that feeling of entitlement was present. They genuinely thought that simply because they were my parents, I owed them something, as if the years of disregard and partiality had no bearing, and that I should help them out now that they were having problems. "I don't owe you anything," I stated icily. "Not after the way you treated me. You made your choice when you believed Claire over me, when you threw me out and didn't even check if I was okay. Now you want me to save you? That's not how this works." My father remained silent. He just sat there looking shamefully at the floor. "However, my mother?" She had not finished yet. She raised her voice and shouted, "We're your parents. We raised you, we took care of you, and now you're just going to abandon us?" I nearly felt terrible for her now, so I shook my head. "You didn't take care of me. Aunt Denise did. You chose Claire, and now you're stuck with her. That's on you." My mom looked like she was going to blow up, but my dad stopped her before she could say anything by placing a hand on her arm. For the first time since they entered, he looked me in the eye as he got to his feet. He answered, "We understand," in a steady but dejected tone. "We're not going to push you anymore. We just needed to try." I nearly felt sorry for him for a moment. That sympathy vanished though, when I realized all they had done to me. I said, "I hope you figure it out," and moved to open the door for them. "But I'm not going to be part of it." My father gave a nod, as if he had anticipated it, but my mother gave me one final glance, part indignant, half begging. However, she got up and followed him out when she realized I wasn't going anywhere. I shut the door after them and stood there for a while, allowing the silence to descend. I had succeeded? For the first time, I felt truly free since I had finally confronted them.